Hello there, I'm Kelly McCullen here in the Raleigh studio for North Carolina Now, where we've been tracking this week's debate on a gay marriage amendment bill. The legislation cleared both the House and Senate earlier this week. What it will do is guarantee that state voters in North Carolina will decide if a definition of marriage as being between one man and one woman should be placed in the North Carolina Constitution. The marriage amendment debate largely fell on partisan political lines. Debate ranged from business implications of adding a marriage definition to the state constitution to stopping a future court action by giving voters a direct say in the issue.
We have two choices: trust our state 6 million voters to make the decision, or leave this to active judges to define it.
You could hardly fill a dump truck with all the rules and all the laws and all the regulations and all the promulgations that people in these chambers have voted for. But yet the things that the citizens of North Carolina have had a chance to vote for, you can fit into the palm of your hand.
North Carolina lawmakers passed a Defense of Marriage state law in 1996. Amendment opponents say that law has never been challenged in court, making a constitutional amendment unnecessary. They also argue that the amendment could present challenges to North Carolina's reputation as a southern state that moved away from discrimination in past decades.
What I think is about to happen here is another instance where, in the not too distant future, we will be apologizing for, yet again, another exercise in unfair and harmful discriminatory practices.
Other amendment opponents say the amendment would affect more than homosexual couples. They believe any unmarried but committed couple, whether gay or straight, could see partnership benefits eliminated, especially in the public sector and possibly in the private sector. Republican sponsors disagree.
It could further invalidate domestic partnership benefits currently offered to same-sex and opposite-sex couples by local municipalities, nonprofits, and other businesses.
Some have tried to say that this would prevent private companies from offering benefits, whether it's life insurance or health insurance or any other kind of insurance, to domestic partners. Well, the answer to that is, first of all, it wouldn't have, under the basic principle that a constitution deals with the actions of government rather than private parties.
The bill's approval cannot be vetoed by the governor, so that guarantees that May 2012 primary voters will have a social issue to decide on their primary ballot. Representative Dale Falwell, why would this bill effectively get its own special session? Because it's dominated all the other discussion.
Sure. Well, this bill, the Defense of Marriage, is not getting its own special session. When we set out this year with Speaker Tillis, he had big goals and short deadlines, and we wanted to get the business of North Carolina done before the end of the fiscal year, adjourn, which we did, come back and do a special session on redistricting, which we have to do every 10 years, and then come back and do the session we're doing this week on constitutional amendments. It's not just the defense of marriage, but also term limits for the Speaker, the President Pro Tem, and some other things that were also going to be considered, like the eminent domain and powers of the Superintendent of Board of Instruction.
With the gay marriage amendment bill, Republicans say, or most of them say, let the people decide this one up or down. Democrats say North Carolinians don't want it. What are North Carolinians telling you?
Well, what North Carolinians are telling us across geographic lines, generational lines, racial lines, political party lines, and even economic lines, that people have a definition in their mind of what marriage is between one man and one woman. But the Constitution, which is a living document, was designed to be amendable. And the forefathers of North Carolina said that there are some decisions that are bigger than 120 members of the House or 50 senators. Those decisions belong to the people of this state.
I've heard two different arguments. Critics will say, yeah, you're going after gay folks. They're not hurting anybody if they want to get married. And other side says, if we don't do this now with the amendment, a court could step in and change the law.
Absolutely.
Is it on that much of an edge?
It's on that much of an edge. We are not reinventing the wheel. I don't care how people choose to live their life, but your viewers need to understand that North Carolina has been sanctioning marriage since the 1600s, even before North Carolina was a state. We sanction it through who we say can perform services. We sanction it in requiring people to get marriage permits. We sanction it in terms of how we write our tax code, our tax laws, our real estate laws, our state laws. If the state is going to sanction marriage in that way and has done that for hundreds of years, then it needs to protect it. What the certainty issue is this, is that you would not want a law that says marriage is between one man and one woman to be overturned by some activist judge, because there's so much in the real estate law, the tax law, and the estate law of North Carolina that would really set North Carolina up on end. The second thing is, by doing this, I think it cements the freedom that businesses have to decide what kind of benefits they want to offer to their employees, regardless of anything else. That this will bring certainty to that issue. Businesses will be able to determine what kind of benefit packages they want to offer and who they want to offer them to, without the interference of the government or the uncertainty of the government going forward.
Can they not do that now in North Carolina?
They can do that, but let's say that somebody sued on the law that is currently in this book, and an activist judge comes back and says, well, you have to offer it to everybody or to no one. Well, businesses, that takes away business freedom. This will bring certainty to this issue, certainty to the business climate of North Carolina, settle it once and for all politically, and move on to the things that we have been concentrating on all year, which is jobs, jobs, jobs.
House Speaker Pro Tem Dale Folwell, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
The North Carolina primary will be May 8th, 2012. This scheduling appears to be a compromise, as the original proposal would have placed the issue on the 2012 general election ballot. A majority vote, up or down by state voters, will determine the proposed gay marriage amendment's fate. The amendment would take effect immediately if it's approved. Legislatively, this bill needed 3/5 majority vote support in both the state House and the state Senate. Senator Eric Mansfield joins us. There were 16 Democrats in the Senate chamber when this vote was cast on the gay marriage amendment bill. They stuck together to vote against it. What led to the cohesion on this piece of legislation?
Well, I think if we look at this as kind of a broad measure, I think we were kind of opposed to that. One, we're in a economic downturn. We have 10.1% unemployment. 450,000 people do not have jobs. We just cut almost $400 million to the Health and Human Services budget, which we have another $300 million, which is not accounted for, and we're going to have to come back and fix that problem. That when we have all those kind of issues, why are we still talking about a social agenda, which is really what this boils down to. And so I think when you look at it from our viewpoint, certainly we had 100 legislative days to really work at some substantive issues. One, can we decrease the tax burden in this state, which we didn't do? Two, can we create jobs for this state, which we didn't do? And thirdly, can we make sure that the overall health of this state is something that's not going to bankrupt the state in the future, which we did not address either. And so when you look at those three great principles, which we didn't do anything about, to come back for a special session to talk about same-sex marriage, to most of us seem like, okay, this is straight politics. And as a freshman senator, I've tried to look at every piece of legislation as is it evidence-based or emotionally based. If it's evidence-based, is it for the betterment of our people? Is it a better policy? And if it doesn't meet those two criteria, then it must be politics. And if you look at this, it's not for people, it's not a better policy, it's just really straight politics.
Republican supporters say the amendment is needed because the current state law could be overturned by a judicial decision. Do you buy that as a relevant argument?
Not in this particular case, because the laws have been on books since 1996. There's never been a single suit against it. No one has challenged it in court as of yet. And I don't think as North Carolina, if you look at the overwhelming judges in North Carolina, they tend to be on conservative judges anyway. So that surprised me that they would feel like that would actually happen. If you want to get people to the polls, you can either do it by having people to believe in their fellow man or to fear their fellow man. And so it's very easy to push them out if you make them fear, and that's what this is about, fear. Hey, there's some nefarious activist judge is going to be somewhere in some court, and they're going to overturn the will of the people of North Carolina. And certainly people will get upset and they'll march out and they'll vote, But is that true? Probably not.
Now, on the business climate side of this, we had some folks who were against the gay marriage amendment bill, saying it's going to hurt business in North Carolina. Are businesses clamoring to preserve the possibility that we could have a gay marriage and civil unions in North Carolina?
Well, I think it's not so much as the gay marriage. I think it's more so that are you creating a climate where there can be discrimination? And I think when you're fighting for businesses, I think they go to places where they say, well, we don't want the climate of discrimination. We want, one, for you to have a great educational system, which again, we didn't do anything this year to help. We want, secondly, to have at least a good tax structure, which again, we didn't do anything. Right. And so when you look at it from that construct, from an overwhelming business view, you want to go to a state where there's not this overhanging air of discrimination against any person. And so that's where I believe that argument was coming from, at least from the Democrat side. So
you see this issue of defending, or as the proponents say, we're defending traditional marriage. You see this as straight discrimination.
Well, I believe that the people who called my office, they kept talking about sin, and this was a sin problem. This was a sin problem.
These are people who were calling you.
Yeah, right. Now I probably had 312 calls on Monday, between Monday and Tuesday, and overwhelmingly it was about that this is a sin. This is a sin. And my question has always been that as a Baptist minister, who's pastor of the church, when we talk about sin, there's a whole bunch of sin that's going on in North Carolina, and there's no constitutional amendments against those. And so I have some question that are we going to just say this one sin is a problem, or are we going to be ecumenical and say that we have a problem with all kinds of sins, and no one really wants to have that discussion. So that's when I think there's some hypocrisy in how we move this amendment forward.
Senator Mansfield, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
The marriage amendment bill establishes how the marriage amendment question will be presented on the ballot. The options are for and against, and it will read, constitutional amendment to provide that marriage between one man and one woman is the only domestic legal union that shall be valid or recognized in this state. The constitutional amendment language includes the verbiage Republicans say clears private companies to offer domestic partner benefits. Dr. David McClendon is the political science chairman at William Peace University in Raleigh. Thanks for being on the show.
Glad to be with you.
First time in a long time.
It has been.
What does a gay marriage amendment referendum do to a primary ballot in May 2012?
Well, it could do a number of things. First of all, before the primary ballot gets here, there's going to be a tremendous amount of attention in North Carolina from out of state, a lot of money coming in. Let me give you some perspective. 2008, $100 million was spent in 3 states for a similar ballot initiative, California and Arizona being the 2 prominent ones. So we're going to have a lot of attention in North Carolina. The Republican ballots could be pretty interesting depending on how the presidential primaries go before that. It could be wrapped up, it might not be. But nonetheless, it's going to bring a lot of social conservatives out. Now the Democrats, they're the real interesting ones. They may not have a very interesting primary year. I don't see one on the horizon for Barack Obama, don't see one for Beverly Perdue. So I think it's going to bring a lot of people out who may not have already come out, particularly if the Republican primary is wrapped up.
Now, heading in as of now, they're going to prepare the ballots. We've got several months between now and May of 2012. At what point would North Carolina start to see the media campaigns, the ad blitzes?
Well, you're going to start seeing probably after the first of the year. I mean, the holidays certainly not going to be a lot of ads and things like that. But first of the year, and it's going to really be ramping up as we get into March and April. Both sides are going to be spending a lot of money. There's going to be lobbying efforts, in all kinds of ways, websites and all kinds of media blitz.
How do you see the pitches going if you're someone who is proposing this amendment?
Well, they're going to be very nostalgic about marriage and going to show it visually, a very traditional couple. They're going to make references to the Bible. It's very much an appeal to the real social conservative base here, which is based in religion. On the other side, you're going to see basically appeals to equality. I mean, you're going to say, okay, we have the 14th Amendment to the Constitution guaranteeing equality. It may make references to racial justice, back to the civil rights movement. This could be a continuation of that. So I think you're going to see very clear messages on both sides targeting just trying to really get people emotionally involved in the issue.
Do you see the grassroots ultimately deciding this issue one way or the other just based on turnout, or will it be just a hot enough primary that you would say a snapshot of the average North Carolina voter will be exposed in this primary vote?
Well, I think just because of the potential for how much money could be spent on advertising and other kinds of communications, we could see people who normally would not be primary voters kind of get revved up. And so, to me, I think it's going to be a big turnout. And it's going to be the kind of thing where the grassroots efforts are going to be very important. I mean, you're going to have to get churches involved. They're going to be bringing buses to the polls like you would not normally see in a primary election. You're going to see equality groups doing the same thing, and on the other side.
Do you see the politicians at the state level staying involved in this issue, or do they throw it out to the advocacy groups and say, we've passed this bill or we fought this bill, now go pass the amendment or defeat the amendment?
I think the sponsors of the legislation are going to stay prominent, but I think many of the legislators, for example, the governor, is probably going to stay in the background. It's just simply a hot button issue, and the governors are already going to be involved in a heavy duty campaign at that point, and that she's got to focus in on jobs and the economy, the kind of pocketbook issues. Don't know if she wants to get involved in that. The other people in the General Assembly, you even heard their comments this week. Not a lot of enthusiasm for the rank and file, but from the social conservative Tea Party leaning people, a lot of enthusiasm.
Dr. David McClennan, Political Science Chairman, William Peace University. Thank you, sir.
Great to be with you.
Gay marriage bill supporters and opponents now take their arguments from the legislative building into the court of public opinion. The media blitz that's coming will likely cost several $1 million in advocacy funding ahead of the May 2012 primary. For instance, in California, the gay marriage amendment referendum and debate back in 2008 led to $60 million in donations for both sides, according to U.S. News and World Report. Barry Smith with M2Mpolitics.com joins us. Representative Dale Folwell is on earlier in this segment, says this special session was not solely about the gay marriage amendment. What else got done down here?
Well, they did do a handful of other things. They did do things like tidy up some stuff that was left hanging from the previous session. But let's make no mistake about it. It was about this constitutional amendment. This was the gay marriage amendment was the dominant theme this week at the General Assembly in downtown Raleigh.
How do you interpret the proponents of this bill? How do you interpret their argument that this is needed as a constitutional amendment right now?
The only real thing you can say is it protects the definition of marriage. It will say marriage is between one man and one woman. As far as actually protecting the institution, I'm not sure state law can do that.
Republicans say a state constitutional amendment will take a state lawsuit out of the equation. Is that true in how you interpret this? It has to go through a federal court, maybe eventually when the U.S. Supreme Court, if ever, weighs in on this issue?
If the only way it would really help from a judge and judicial standpoint is if it were challenged in the state courts. Then the state courts would say, well, this is what the Constitution says. We have to go by what the Constitution says. That wouldn't really bind a federal judge. If the federal courts and, like you said, the United States Supreme Court gets a hold of it and says, well, this violates the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution supersedes anything that would be in the North Carolina Constitution.
The vibe I got down here this week during the discussion of this bill doesn't pass an amendment to the state constitution. It allows the people to vote on it. Well, why is one side acting as if it's a foregone conclusion? Why are the opponents of this bill resigned? It seems that this will be part of the state constitution.
Well, I don't know that they are resigned. I covered.
I got the sense that there was a defeated attitude here.
I covered a rally the other day, and they were of people who were against this amendment, and I'm sure they're adamant. They're going to wage. It's going to be a big battle over the next few months, up until May the 8th. Polls are showing us different things on this. Polls are showing that there appears to be a shift in the way a lot of people believe on this issue. A lot of people maybe believe that, marriage really ought to be between a man and a woman, but not necessarily civil unions, or not necessarily that we need to put it in the Constitution. And again, the polls vary. Usually the ones that show who votes, they're more in favor of it, but the overall population appear
But
more
would you
against
see
it.
that if those polls you're suggesting say a shift back maybe away from this amendment vote, are you seeing that as a liberal shift or a libertarian shift?
Probably more of a libertarian shift. I think it's more of a
government get out of the way.
And what's it? I think a lot of people see see it as not really affecting them.
What's it to them if they're not going to ever be affected by this provision?
If they're not ever going to be affected by this, and if they're not really interested in who's going to be on the ballot on May the 8th, either the Republican primary or the Democratic primary, then they may not. I mean, if they wouldn't show up to vote anyway, I don't see them showing up specifically to vote on this if it's not something that's really a high priority for them.
Barry Smith, m2mpolitics.com. Visit that website because Barry works hard on it. Thank you, sir, for sharing your insight on the show.
Thank you.
Once again, the gay marriage amendment to North Carolina's Constitution will be on the May 2012 primary ballot. As we approach primary day next spring, we'll be following this issue for you. Back to you.